We want to have a conversation now about children and elevating children from poverty through sustainable livelihood interventions. Joining us are two gentlemen. Caleb Munyoki is the manager of partnerships, Compassion International Kenya, and Julius Wairoma is a food security and livelihoods specialist at the same organization, Compassion International Kenya. Gentlemen, good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Karibuni sana to Kenya's biggest conversation.
Thank you. Thank you.
You are now seated on the hot seats of the Situation Room. Well, comfortable. It's been a wet morning in Nairobi. How are the roads this morning as you came here?
I came a bit early, so I didn't encounter any jam.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was fine. It was a good drive to this place.
Yeah.
Yes.
Were you on tarmac throughout, or did you get into some puddles at some point?
Tarmac, the Ngong Road bypass, and then here. Yeah.
You had a smooth one.
Yes.
Caleb, for you?
Mine was pretty smooth, except for some traffic around the gates.
Yeah, that's what happens at the gates. And you remember, the expressway is one giant, like we said, it's one giant gutter that's collecting all that rainwater and dumping it to the road below. And as we are seeing now in these places where General Motors at Kenyatta Avenue roundabout, at Haile Selassie roundabout, at Westlands, it's really, really not a good situation for very many people. Now, we spoke earlier about children who are going to school. We'll be talking about children throughout this. So spare a thought for any pedestrian that you see on the way. Please do not splash water on them. Just slow down, pass the pedestrian, and then drive off if you're driving in a vehicle. It's all about courtesy. CT, why don't you do like that and welcome our guests with the day's proverb?
Yes. The whole of this week, we are proverbs from the country of Kenya. You've all heard of it. It's on the East African coast, capital Nairobi. It has 47 counties. Yes, that Kenya.
You're reminding us about Kenya. What Kenya is.
Well, some of our listeners may not know about Kenya, so this is actually for them, so that they understand.
Okay.
Because we are listened to from all over the globe. Okay? Crawling on hands and knees has never prevented anyone from walking upright.
Crawling on hands and knees has never prevented anyone from walking upright. Caleb, you look like you're thinking hard on this.
I was just wondering, crawling on knees and hands, I imagine you're talking about children, so we have a responsibility to support them to eventually walk upright, and that's what we do at Compassion. We take care of babies from as early as 1 year up to the age of 22. We're working in 31 counties with over 100,000 participants in our program. We're working in partnership with churches. We have over 466 churches that we're partnering with. And our main business in Kenya from 1980 is to support these little ones who are crawling on knees and hands to eventually become fruitful, successful adults that are capable of not only leading the pack in the nation, but also fulfilling the dreams of their lives.
So that's a good interpretation of that proverb. But there are also people living with disabilities, right? And Julius, they could also be crawling on their hands and knees.
Yes. We've not we've not neglected them. We are an all-inclusive. We use an all-inclusive approach. Our programming actually targets the most vulnerable,
Right.
in the society, in terms of the economic status and even in terms of their physical abilities. So we the kind of interventions we support them with are those that enable them now to be able to take their place in the society and provide for themselves.
So, if I listen to your definition, would you then say that someone's inability to provide for themselves could in essence is what cripples them as opposed to the physical impediments that they may actually have? That this inability to have what we like terming as empowerment and economic empowerment is actually the crippling factor. Would you say that is the situation?
Yes, I think that contributes a lot.
Yes.
The economic empowerment of the most vulnerable in the society. Because if you are not able to facilitate them to utilize the resources that they have to be able to provide for themselves, then they remain behind. They remain vulnerable. But if we harness the resources, we empower them to be able to recognize the resources that they have, and they are able to harness these resources to better their lives, then they are able to contribute to their betterment in the society.
Let me get traditional on this particular matter and look at our backgrounds, the traditional backgrounds. What is it in communities that made someone be looked up to be considered to be a worthwhile member of the community? What is it? What did you need to have? What did you need to do? What contribution did you need to make?
You know, and I like their approach, let's take it traditional a little. By default in our communities, anybody who is contributing meaningfully to the society is seen as a key person in that community. The world over, children and people who are incapacitated in one way or the other are neglected. And in our country and many other countries, children and youth don't participate necessarily in building up the nation. They look at many budgets, either in organizations, in churches, unless it's an organization like Compassion where we are wholly dedicated to children and youth. Budgets primarily look at what adults have interest in. So building the ability and capacity of these young ones becomes paramount to create a society that's going to be pragmatic, dynamic, fruitful in the future. So this person becomes important in the society because we empower them through programs that make them capable of not only fending for themselves, but contributing meaningfully to the communities.
What kind of programs do you run at Compassion?
At Compassion, we run one seamless program where we take care of children, infants, as early as 1 year to around 3 years. Then they get into childhood, and we have a robust program for youths where we support youths.
When you say you take care, are you like a children's home?
We're not a children's home. We work in partnership with churches, 466 churches. So these children are taken care of in their homes. And we look at 4 areas. We look at their physical development, that means health and the like. We look at how they grow in education. We look at their spiritual outlook, and we also look at their socio-emotional, psychological, if so you wish. So in these 4 areas of development, if a child is taken care of properly, they end up becoming a fulfilled youth who is contributing meaningfully in the society. And in the youth program, we support the youths to have different tracks of ending well. So those that love sports, they get into sports. We have people who get into medicine, into education, teachers, pastors, and the like.
I don't get it still. Because so you are working with churches,
yes,
to support children who are in their homes with their parents.
Yeah.
What exactly are you doing?
Well, one, holistic parental outlook is important to us. So we have programs where we build the capacity of these churches to support caregivers that are in the program. Some of them look at, for example, people in Pokot, Samburu. They have not been exposed to what you can call holistic parental care for their children. So when we expose them to this type of care, they are able now to take care of their children who are at a disadvantaged position by not being exposed to what is probably in the modern day cities like here. So these parents take care of the children in their homes, but with information and the capacity that comes through the enabled church.
Give an example of a community. You've mentioned, Samburu.
We have
give an
so
example of a community and how your interventions come in from Compassion International, how you then work with a certain church, and empowering the community?
I'll give an example of a place I've worked for a few years. That is Tiati. Everybody fears Tiati.
Why?
I don't know. Of course, banditry and that type of thing. The terrain, the weather is not pleasant. There's no sufficient food. Water is an issue. Transport, infrastructure, no internet out there. We've been in Tiati for 6 years now, and in Tiati we have 4,000 children or thereabout that are under sponsorship of 13 churches. We have seen children that were otherwise not going to attend school being in school, and the retention in school is very high because we support them through paying tuition fees, paying for their exposure trips, supporting them in books, uniform and the like. We've also intervened through this time of drought. Some of them couldn't attend schools if we hadn't intervened through provision of food for several months in this drought season. The issue of malnutrition is really high in this area. A few of them, when we started partnership with them, health centers were an issue. So facilitating clinics, mobile medical clinics. Great work is happening in East Pokot. Interventions are high, and I'm persuaded beyond any dubitable reasons that in the near future we're going to have a new Tiati.
Yeah. Probably would add to what Caleb has just said about our approach. We are now going beyond children and targeting the household where the child comes from, especially in terms of empowering the parents or the caregivers to be able to provide for the families. So with these approaches, we engage the families in various agricultural activities, income generating activities, and even building their capacity to be able to start businesses, giving them vocational training, entrepreneurship training, and also just supporting them to mentoring them to be able to do these businesses and provide for their family. So it is holistic.
Right.
But we start at the household level by promoting climate smart household food security approaches for them to be able to produce food even at times of drought or with when you have scarcity of water resources. Yes.
So, I mean, obviously, one of the things that Compassion then focuses on is sustainability of whatever it does, right?
Yes.
So, sustainability of a project whereby you're coming into a household and taking care of a child and making sure that child has fed, is taken care of medically, their spiritual as well as then socioeconomic elements being taken care
Precisely.
of. Yes. But then that child is but a part of a larger unit.
Yes.
So the sustainability comes in. So do you find yourself year on year feeding this same child, or are you then feeding this child plus something else so that the parents then have capacity to be able to feed their children as well as themselves and take care of moving forward? Because child could be fed, but then the family unit then still remains in jeopardy.
Actually, we moved beyond feeding the child. We are now working with the parents to be able to provide for the families, especially in terms of food. So what happens is that we engage them in different cultural activities. We have different approaches, particularly those ones that target households. In the rural areas, for instance, we promote kitchen gardens where they are able to produce foods in small spaces near their homes, so that they don't spend the income that they have on buying food. And then now that's a way of mitigating against just making them dependent. So they are no longer dependent because the parents now have the ability to be able to feed them throughout. So what normally happens in terms of emergencies like the recent drought, that's when you now come in and provide support in terms of providing food baskets, just very temporary food baskets, and then cash transfers, and also seed inputs such as seeds to help them come up immediately after those emergencies, and also improving on the water infrastructures, developing water infrastructure, so that now after such an emergency they're able to pick up and just continue sustaining their lives.
Well, listening to you, I actually get the impression I'm listening to a Kenya government minister.
Thanks for the compliment.
Yeah, it's like someone in the Ministry of Education is saying, well, we've allocated this amount of money for capitation for this school, and we've also assisted in the building of X classrooms, and we've made sure that they have small kitchen gardens so that they can actually grow crops while learning agriculture, they can feed themselves, and we've developed water pans so that they can actually collect rainwater.
ICT, then you sound like the president.
Now, I'm going somewhere with this. As I usually do. How long has Compassion International been doing the work that you're doing? And in terms of the effectiveness of what you have done, if you were to be asked about a success story, and alongside the success story, one would ask the challenges you've had that have reduced the successes that you had envisioned, what would you say is the picture of success over the years? The plan you had, what you've done, how it has helped, and the outcome, but where you started.
Yeah, the picture of success is a household that previously was so vulnerable, very poor, of low economic status, being able to feed themselves, being able to engage in economic activities and generate income, to be able to support various household activities. So yes, so that is basically what we are working with the households to achieve. Yeah.
That's a generic statement. Now, give it a real life picture. When I take the example of a family that was disadvantaged economically, what then happened in details to enable them to move from this position where they can now feed themselves? What happened? What were they doing? And this process that you call, what is it that they are now able to do that they were not previously able to do?
Yeah, let me take that, and thank you for the compliments. We work very closely with the county governments and the national government and other like-minded organizations. And on your question, and I invite you to come with me one day to Baringo. We have a community, we call it the Kibingo.
How will we travel to Baringo?
We'll make the logistics for you.
We won't crawl.
You need to come in person.
To be sure. You might tell me that because of the prevailing economic circumstances, I have to go by camel or something.
At some point, maybe we'll do a desert camel.
Yes.
There's a community, it's called Kibingor, the Kibingor community. They have a lot of honey. They used to sell the honey out to the middlemen at very, throwaway price, bringing very minimal economic value to the families. So we mobilized the community. We supported them in doing a honey processing unit. As we're talking today, every day they bring honey to the city and many other towns in the city, in the country. Now, this honey is coming from the households. Those households have been taught on how, or trained on how to do beekeeping in a modern way. When they harvest this honey and it's put together collected together at the church, then they fetch better prices. And so the economic situation in the family is improved. So situations where they could not access medical, they could not access a meal, they could not access school for the other children, school fees, these families are now empowered and they are on a fast track towards transformation.
So the bee farmers have a cooperative.
Yes.
And that cooperative is nestled within a church setting.
Yes.
Yes.
So has the middleman been cut out?
Probably, maybe I
The
would
community
give,
has become the middleman, essentially. Yeah.
And how do you determine that the person they then sell their honey to gives them the best possible returns for their product?
Yeah, what I would say, maybe let me just give the structure, because we start at the lowest level. We have these community members that we are targeting. We organize them into self-help groups, depending on their interest. So the example we've given of beekeepers, people who have been engaged in beekeeping activities are brought together. Here they are trained, and they're supported with startup inputs and equipment to start off. After production cycle and after generating income, with the training that we've given them, they are able now to continue expanding, scaling up their production by buying the equipment and other inputs, so that they are able to continue generating income from that. Regarding the issue of the middleman, what we normally do, we link them with markets, the buyers. So the buyers will say what type of produce do they need. For example, do they need raw honey? Do they need semi-processed? Do they need packaged? Like the Kibigor community is mentioning, they're already packaging and branding. So that is the demand of the market that we link them to. There are some buyers who just prefer semi-processed. In that case, some of the equipment that we've supported them with are the centrifuges, just to ensure that they don't sell raw products. So we have activities to do with the market linkage, which ensure that we eliminate the middlemen, so that they're dealing with the real buyers and they get value for their good value for their produce.
Okay. Now, the advancement or the improvement in the economic status, how is this manifested? Are people building better houses? Are they wearing shoes where they didn't wear shoes? Have they more clothes than they used to have before? What is it that now
You can do.
yes, they can do
And
that they couldn't do before?
Most of the caregivers you're working with, or the parents you're working with in the community, have enhanced their social economic status. Of course, you're talking about better houses. They're able to access medical facilities. They're able to pay school fees for their children. And they're also getting better meals. They're having higher income. So their status in the society is elevated. Yeah.
Now, the question that I'd asked earlier on, the numbers, in terms of how old is Compassion International in the country?
40 years.
40 years.
Yes.
Okay, now in the 40 years,
Yes.
the success stories that we have, do you have individuals whom you can point to and who can say,
Several.
If it wasn't for Compassion International, I would not be.
There are
Actually, we are working with 120,000 households.
Good number.
If we are to estimate, we are targeting 840,000 individuals. Yes.
Okay.
So I would work with a percentage of at least 60%.
That number can actually win you the governor's seat in Nairobi.
Let's take a break on this. When we come back, we hear the impact story of what Compassion International Kenya has been doing over the last 40 years, especially looking at how you are impacting the children by working in their community. Okay, impacting children. Of course, the areas that you talked about physical, you talked about education, spiritual, and psychological. So you'll show us the impact of what you're doing, Kibingor and wherever, on how it has actually translated into this. Time for us to take a break. Munyoki, Caleb. Ndu would call you Caleb. She went to preparatory and kindergarten.
She attended school.
And then elementary school.
And then finishing school.
I went to Kimana Primary School and Kimana Nursery School. So I'll call you Caleb. Caleb Munyoki is the manager of partnerships at Compassion International Kenya. Julius Wairoma is a food security and livelihood specialist at Compassion International. Ndu, please tell Julius and Caleb about Minute Maid.
I need a break from you. Okay, so Minute Maid gives you an opportunity to take a moment and say, okay, it's been a minute, it's been rough. Can we just take a moment and recalibrate? Can we take a moment and just have an moment? Through all the fantastic flavors that Minute Maid has on offer, you get an opportunity to take a gulp and take a moment to relax.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.
From Compassion International Kenya, and that's Caleb Munyoki from Compassion International. He's a manager of partnerships, and Julius Wairoma is a food security and livelihood specialist. We're talking about how they are actually helping to improve the livelihoods of children from poverty and elevating them from poverty through sustainable livelihood interventions. And you were telling us about the impact. So, yeah, Caleb, you talked about what you focus on those areas. You look at the physical well-being of a child. You look at how they are able to get into education and how they are able to also get spiritual nourishment, how they also get psychosocial support. So from all these projects that you've told us about, I mean, the areas that you've gone in, the communities that you've gone in, what's the impact like?
Well, a great question. And a big question this morning. Singling out the fact that we have 130,000 participants in the country, and we have those that have already gone through the program. In terms of medical support, I would bring examples of children that have had paid up medical expenses for otherwise diseases that would have taken their lives. We're talking of heart diseases. We've taken in excess of, in hundreds actually, for specialized treatment and availed opportunity for them to live a normal life. We're talking of supporting those that have been born with inabilities, and we take them through medical procedures. The numbers are so many. In terms of education, we spend every year in excess of, I would say, 10 million shillings to ensure retention of the 130,000 participants in school. We support the participants also to choose careers that are interested for them, and we support them through enabling them access schools, whether they are in remote places or in the urban setup. We support them through getting into colleges that will offer careers and specialized trainings for them to achieve their dreams. And of course, matters spiritual. We are in a church setup. Some of these participants will hardly go to church, but because of the programs we run and in partnership with these churches, these participants find themselves coming to church. Train a child in the way it should be when they are young, and when they grow old, they will not leave from that training. So, in communities, for example, I mentioned Tiati earlier. One of the interventions I believe that we are doing that will bring a different generation is in training those young children and youths to be Christians, so that in the future they will treat their neighbors the way they would want to be treated. I believe this is one of the greatest strands in ending of the banditry attacks in the area. And when we look at the ability of the children or the young adults as they grow to interact with other people in a reasonable, in a compassionate manner, the fact that you're exposing the child at a very tender age into behaviors, into understandings that are, I would say, rationally good for a normal citizen, means that we are participating in a great way in impacting our nation towards a good neighborhood. That's what I would say.
I'm looking for the sustainability angle. In some cases, so you are running a program that attracts these children to come to church, and then in church is where you are going to engage them. You're spending 10 million shillings a year to support them to stay in school and to continue learning. Where is the sustainability? What if Compassion actually just walked out of this community? How would they be able to sustain these things that you're doing?
Actually, that's why we are focusing on caregiver empowerment, empowering the parents to be able to provide for their households economically through training them and supporting them to start up economic activities on their own at household level. So what happens is that we have the parents coming into groups and they identify enterprises that they would want to undertake. Some of them are crop enterprises, some are livestock enterprises, some are non-agricultural enterprises. And we support them with the training and the startup inputs and equipment, and we engage them, and link them with the markets. Okay. So even when this support from Compassion ends, if they continue, engaging in these entrepreneurial activities, they'll be able to sustain themselves. They'll be able to provide for their households.
Is there a community that you can tell us where Compassion International worked in this community for 15 years and then walked out or scaled back its support in the community, and the community is still doing the things that they were trying to do?
Yeah, we have quite a number, scattered all over the country, and probably I would just give an example. Even Nairobi here, we have several communities that we worked with. After their children phase out, because the children phase out of Compassion when they are 22 years, they are able to sustain their own economic activities based on the foundation that we've given them. So we don't just focus on the child alone. As we engage these parents on these economic activities, they just improve their income, and we put in measures, different measures. For example, we have savings groups where they are able to borrow, contribute money and borrow. So
I like visual examples. If you could just give one and say,
yes,
in this community we worked over 10 years.
Yes.
These children grew up to become adults, but then the adults that we work with, the younger children, we did not need to support them because the adults already knew to take the children to church, so they were getting their spiritual nourishment. They had the capacity to grow food, so they could feed their children. They could also take their children to school. Such.
Yeah, maybe if I can give one or two examples. And of course, there are the challenges that we face in terms of when we put so much in developing a community, but yet we have other factors that hinder us from going as fast and achieving our intent. But if I give the example of the community of Kanzino, it's
in Kitui,
in Mumoni. I've seen caregivers there having farms. They are able to sell crops in the market, and their lives are getting changed. They have a model school where they also getting very good results from the participants in the program. Pastor Mutia there, I saw the other day, they've done a mega church. This is a community that is developing, and it's a community we can confidently say in the near future they are going to be influencers of the larger Mumoni. Yeah.
How do you decide what communities then that you go into to work? Is there a footprint of the nation and say, well, here we'll have vulnerable communities. We're likely to find children in vulnerable family situations where they can't feed. What informs the decision to go into a particular community and then start the work there?
Yeah, the first issue here, we exist as advocates for children to release them from poverty in Jesus' name. So the first indicator is poverty, and we look at the country's poverty index. So we, in places where poverty is at levels where it makes the communities be vulnerable in terms of development. So you'll find us in pockets where the poverty index is on the higher side. That's the major indicator. Yeah.
So partnerships. Sorry, Siti, go on.
I was going to ask, when you talk about partnerships and you talk about the wonderful work that you do, what would you do if we had this imaginary situation where there was no poverty in Kenya and people who needed to be uplifted economically did not exist? What would you do?
Very good question, and that's our hope, that one day we'll get to that level.
Actually, the people we are dealing with are the progressive poor, not the people who are just, they're helpless. So they are moving away from poverty. But in terms of empowerment, for example, those who are already engaged in businesses, we are bringing in soft skills such as entrepreneurship, linking them to markets so that they are able to compete. Yeah, so we are moving from that place where somebody is so vulnerable, a household is so vulnerable, to a situation whereby they are moving towards prosperity. So actually, if you look at the profile of the households we are dealing with now, they are not that helpless because of the empowerment programs that we've involved them in. So they're at that level that they can determine, they can sit as a committee and decide this is what we want to do. We've saved this money in our savings group. This is what we are going to direct it towards this project. Or we have this amount of money for you to borrow and start your own business or expand your own business. So I think we are moving towards even targeting those who are already moved away from that lower rank.
Does compassion work in developed countries, places where one could argue some of these endemic situations of poverty that we witness on this continent and in Asia don't exist? Do you work in such places?
As I earlier alluded, our major work is where poverty is.
No, I'm arguing that there's poverty everywhere. Yes. You see where I'm coming from?
Yes.
I've understood what you're saying, but I'm looking at it and saying there is no place on the planet where there is no poverty. So there's a lot more poverty in certain parts of the world, like on this continent of ours, and I understand you're working there. But what about communities that are actually very poor but are in resource plenty countries? Do you work in such places?
I'll look at it in terms of the numbers of the affected people.
Okay.
And I like the argument that we have communities where the country is well resourced, but there's a small community that is living in poverty. Compare that number to the current situation in Africa. It's humongous. It's only fair to invest where we get returns in terms of the people we affect. So we're working in countries where the poverty index is high and we have large populations and communities that are living in poverty.
Okay. Now, let me ask this sensitive question. When we talk about working in partnership with governments, we know how governments are resourced. We pay taxes. So that one is clear. Okay? How are you resourced? And how much of those resources are local? As in, if you're working in Kenya, how much of the resources that you work with are actually generated locally?
When I said earlier that we work in partnership with the local governments and the county governments and the national government. And of course, looking at resources, I'm not looking at money only. I'm looking at people. I'm looking at professional intervention.
You're talking about human resource.
Human resource.
Yes.
A case like Tiati, when compassion facilitates a community to be together and ask a medical intervention from the government, that's a local resource. And what compassion has done in such a case is use the available platform, educate and empower the community on the importance of medical interventions, and arranged for the county government and the national government to do a medical intervention for the local community. So we work both with the government in terms of the resources and facilitate ensuring that these resources reach the disadvantaged communities.
Okay.
Do you participate in the budget making process so that you ensure that, for example, it's not just an intervention in terms of a medical camp, it's the establishment of a proper health facility in a certain community that didn't have a health facility, ensuring that there's adequate resourcing of this health facility, from the health workers to all the materials that are needed. So that would require that you actually participate in the budget making cycle to influence that this takes place. There's allocation of budget and it goes on. Do you do that?
Maybe what I would say regarding livelihoods, what you've encouraged our partners to do is to work closely with government. So they sit in those committees at that level, because we are spread across the country. So at the county level, we encourage them to attend those meetings so that when needs are being prioritized, their needs are taken care of. And also we avoid duplication, where we are spending on an initiative and government also is spending on an initiative. So when there's an initiative that we would like to take to intervene in, and the government is planning for it, we just say that at that level that we already have this project ongoing, and they just give us an opportunity to do it. So we complement government efforts, but not only government, we also work closely with other development organizations in any particular locality. So what we encourage our partners to do is to reach out to all the development organizations and find out what they are doing, have meetings so that we just maximize on the synergies.
Sure.
Yes, so that we give the best using minimal resources and not heaping resources, doing the same thing every organization, because it's not a competition. We just complement one another. And then we're also working very closely with the corporates, the private sector, tapping into their CSR. So when they're interested in a particular initiative, we also reach out to them and just tap into their resources so that they're also part of this development process.
Okay, so let's say you've gone into community and then you've done the initial work that needs to be done, identification, and then going ahead and facilitating at whatever level that you do. How then do you monitor over time? Because you said that, look, it would be your joy at some point to say that there are no longer any communities where you have to go in and intervene. But then in order to get there must be some kind of, I'm going to sound so NGO-ish, but some monitoring and evaluation that takes place to say, okay, this is where we have reached, the interventions that we've put in place are actually working. So what does that monitoring look like, and how do you carry that out for progress?
We have a robust monitoring and evaluation reporting and learning system where we have periodic reports coming from our partners just to update us on the progress. We also do monitoring visits. We do regular field visits to see how the interventions are being implemented and give technical support in terms of seeing how these activities can be improved to better their lives. We also have periodic evaluations. Every cycle of reporting, which is 6 months, we do an evaluation just to give us an overall picture of what is going on there. We also have various forms of documentation, photos, videos, just to have a picture of what is happening around the country. So and our monitoring is participatory. We have a multidisciplinary team coming from the national office to visit the sites and just engage with the communities and assess the progress of implementation and also advise accordingly. So and also we work closely with, as we had said, the county government. They also support us in that, in those processes. So we engage them, and the most important part of it, which ensures sustainability, is that you have the community themselves also participating in the monitoring process, because they have committees there. So it is not a situation where we come and then we work with them.
Right.
Yes.
How do you mobilize the resources that you use? How does Compassion mobilize the resources that it's using to support its programs?
Thank you. We are registered in the country as an NGO. We have our senior partners in Colorado, US. They are part of the great resource that we have. Locally here, when we doing projects, say that are done by the county government or the national government, we align our resources to make sure that, as my colleagues said, there's no duplication. Churches also, we mobilize resources through churches. They're locally available resources that probably don't need as much funds. Say, for example, if we are doing a classroom in Makueni, where sand is available, stones are available, water is available, those are resources that we mobilize right from the church. And then the technical expertise, some churches have members that are doctors, architects, engineers, who will tap into that resource in a situation where we are doing a project for that church.
I see. Final question, City. 30 seconds.
You've asked it.
That's the one you wanted to ask.
I was going to ask that.
That's the one. Okay. So currently you have 130,000 participants.
And adding.
And adding.
Sure.
And you said your target is 800.
If you are looking at individuals, it comes to 840,000 because you have 120,000 households.
Households that are actually participating in how many counties?
31 counties. And in the 31 counties, we have a partnership facilitator. This is a person who is in touch with the churches 24/7. He understands the community. They work closely with the community, and they also participate in supporting needs identification and also in the process of monitoring and evaluation.
Good stuff. Good stuff. Thank you very much for all the good work that you're doing. Thank you for coming here to let us know about it and to tell the public as well. Asante sana for all the good work in releasing children from the shackles of poverty through sustainable livelihood interventions. That's what Compassion International Kenya has been doing, and Caleb Munyoki, the manager of partnerships, as well as Julius Wairoma, who's a food security and livelihood specialist, have been here with us talking to us about this